Chair, comrades, this is the third occasion that I've spoken in this area. And tonight, you've already heard an excellent contribution from an excellent candidate who spelled out what needs to be done in order to have a real change. Andrew tonight told you what's wrong with society. He explained why jobs are being lost. But he also did more than that. He pointed the finger at those responsible for creating that chaos. And in doing so, he posed a question to you. Who are you going to vote for? I put it to you. I spoke here in 1980 in support of the steelworkers' strike. I spoke in Llanwern as well, in Newport. I warned that there would be disastrous consequences if the government continued to pursue its policy of running down major indigenous industries. The press, yes, they're here tonight, said I was a liar. In 1984, I came along here, tremendous audience, loads of media, and all we could think about was one incident that happened during that night. But on that occasion, we warned not just the people of Wales, but we warned the people of the UK that unless trade unionists in other unions and their leaders who are responsible came to the assistance of the miners, they would be next to face the hatchet that would be pointed in their direction. I put it to you, look around you, what's happened. It's interesting, when I came down to Wales to do this meeting, I dug out this quotation from a man who visited Wales in 1833. He was the Chartist leader, Brantiri O'Brien. And after seeing the poverty, the chaos that existed in Wales, he wrote these words in the Poor Man's Guardian, the paper of the Chartists. The desire of one man to live on the fruits of another's labour is the original sin of the world. It is this which fills the world with faction and hypocrisy. It is this sin which has produced a record of crimes and calamities of all mankind. It is, in fact, the parent injustice from which all injustice springs. No words of mine could begin to match the eloquence of what he said in 1833. But how prophetic when Andrew was telling you about the unemployment figures. He also said something else. He said, you've been fed a monumental lie. And he was right. Today, we're being told that there are about 1.7 million people unemployed. It's a lie. There are nearly 6 million people unemployed. The only people that count as unemployed in government statistics are those who receive unemployment benefit. The Socialist Labour Party say if you take into account people who are seeking a job, the figure is nearly 6 million. You know and I know. You've only got to look around you and you can see at a glance the suffering, the problems in family after family. All of them have been affected by the policies not just of this government, But the policies of the previous Labour government, a disaster led by Tony Blair, launched us into unfair, unlawful wars in the Middle East, where hundreds of thousands of people have died. The chaos you see now, which Andrew referred to, of boats filled with people desperate to get away from killing and disaster. What can we do about it? Well, I'll tell you what we could do about it. We could first of all distinguish between migrants and immigrants. Might surprise people to know that over 700,000 people came into Britain last year from Commonwealth countries and those countries where we occupied for years, like the West Indies and India and Pakistan and Africa. Only 251,000 came in. 350,000 people emigrated out of Britain to Australia, New Zealand, America, Canada, and throughout the continent. Now, I'm not the expert on arithmetic, but I reckon that 350,000 leaving these shores and 250,000 in round figures coming in as immigrants, as they always did, means that we ought to have a falling population. But something changed. The treaties of Maastricht and Nice of the European Union did what Andrew explained so vividly. It provided for the free movement of capital and labour. And in specific terms, this is what it means. Case by case. I spoke in Scotland, in Ayrshire, the birthplace of Keir Hardie. There was a huge plant operated by Volvo, been there years, and they were closing it and taking it to Poland. And I challenged the managing director to debate with me outside the gates of that factory. And he was stupid enough to agree. He explained that economics play a part. So I told him that he better explain that to the people assembled. All the workers were there. I said, is this factory producing Volvo trucks profitable, or is it uneconomic? He said, it's profitable. I said, then why on earth are you moving it? He says, because we can employ people in Poland at 20 to 30 pounds a day less than we can pay here in Scotland. That's what the free movement of capital means. Dyson, the bloke who has the sweeping up equipment, he certainly swept away. He took his factory abroad. I wouldn't touch a Dyson appliance with a pitchfork. And he did so because he can get cheap labour. And as a consequence of that, we then have people coming in freely, anytime they want, into Britain. Migrant labour, not immigrants. And for the sake of the cameras and the radio, if it's switched on, by the way, mine is, I don't trust you. I'm right, aren't I? We've always had a policy that we don't accept people being transported en bloc into a nation. I can remember the miners in Britain when the government was going to bring in literally hundreds of thousands of people, mainly from Italy, after the Second World War. And the National Union of Mine Workers said no, because it will be a threat to our industry. They'll close our pits. In South Wales, the leadership under Painter and others said, do you realise the consequences of what you're saying? Who was right? Look what happened. The pits, of course, did suffer attack in this country. And here we were faced with migrant labour, not immigrants. I'll tell you how we would operate a sensible policy. We would set a cap on the number of people coming into Britain equal to that of the people going out of Britain. At the present time, that means we would have 80,000 people more than are currently coming in from countries which we accept. Former colonies of Britain, former Commonwealth countries, or Commonwealth countries. So there'll be 80,000 in negative terms. In other words, more would go out than were coming in. So, do we take anybody in? Well, we could make a start. Instead of sending a gunboat to try and stop them sailing away into the continent and drowning, we could pick them up and show compassion and understanding in a world that's supposed to be caring about people. What's happening there is nothing short of murder. Now, I promised tonight, I said to Andrew, look, I'm going to be moderate. I always am. And I'm not going to say anything controversial. So I'm going to just spell out what we mean by a national minimum wage and the £12 an hour that Andrew so rightly says should be the case. There isn't another political mainstream party coming anywhere near the figure that we are putting forward as a minimum wage. Some say it ought to be a living wage. That's the Labour Party, a living wage. That's slightly higher than a minimum wage. But none of them are exceeding a figure of about £8. But not until 2020. We say now, £12 an hour, £480 a week, £25,000 a year. What's wrong with that? Doesn't everybody deserve a chance to earn real money? We would pay students to study. It's an investment. We used to pay apprentices to work because we knew we were investing in the future. By the way, that figure of £12 and that overall figure per year of 25,000 for those people in a job as a minimum, we would also make that the average pension paid to every pensioner in this country who've given a lifetime of work and commitment. Of course, our opponents will disagree with us. I've been reading what some of them have been saying. We've actually updated our manifesto, I'll show you after, because I didn't believe they could do it. As Andrew explained, they're all trying to run the system better than the others. I'll tell you the major difference between all that lot and the Socialist Labour Party. We want to see a socialist system of society where we take into common ownership the means of production, distribution and exchange. I don't know how many people heard the interview with Liz Screen tonight on Welsh Radio. She was asked a question by this smart young reporter. Where would you get the money from to pay the thing you've just advanced? She said, from the bank's profits. Already, she says, the major banks, just a few major banks, 25 billion in profits. He said, but that would be just a one-off, wouldn't it? Well, it must be nuts. or he needs education. Of course, they've been making far more than that every single year. The question is, why do we have all these banks? Why don't we have a nationalised bank that gives to people a fair service at no cost? In other words, if there is any surplus produced, it should go towards paying a national minimum wage. In addition, we should also look at our National Health Service. People in Wales are proud, rightly so, that it was the Labour government and a Welshman who oversaw the development, creation of a National Health Service. It was designed to be available to everybody at the time of need, upon demand, and completely free of charge. Prescriptions were free, where before parents couldn't take their kids to a doctor because they were afraid of the cost. I remember when I was a child, I didn't understand it at the time. I used to take sixpence every week from my mother to pay to a doctor in order that we could get a service in the event that I might be taken ill. We should say loud and clear to all of them, Tory, Labour, Liberal, Democrat, we want the National Health Service that we envisaged, not what we're getting in terms of cutbacks. We want to go to a hospital and be treated not in 4 hours, but in 4 minutes. We want to go to a general practitioner and be treated immediately, and not between 9 and 5, but 24 hours a day. If it's right that other people have to work shifts, then we should employ sufficient doctors and support staff to provide that service that's essential. You can't say to a pilot flying a plane, your 8 hours is up, that's it. Why should we turn off the health service at 5, 6, 7 or 8 o'clock at night and rely probably on what's called a locum? Now, I'm not knocking it, it's a wonderful service. It's a service that provides excellent care, but it's stretched to the limit because the people who are staffing it are simply too few to care for the mass of patients that they have. Don't forget, when it was created, the population of this country was under 50 million. At the end of the Second World War, it's now nearly 70 million. And that's why we say it should have an injection of £20 billion now into a health service to make it better and available to everybody. Where would it come from? That's the question. These lads, they're bright, you know, from radio and television. They're trained. Where are you going to get the money from? Tell you where we get it from, shall I? We will cut the defence budget by 2/3, scrap Trident missiles and tell the Americans to bugger off home. That's where we get the money from, £29 billion. In addition, the cost of Trident is going to be 150 billion. Billion, not million. For 4 submarines with nuclear weapons. And can't we have real faith in them? If we fire one, we're all destroyed in 5 minutes. Now that's a real insurance policy, isn't it, eh? Insure with us, Trident will look after you for 5 minutes. It's the most stupid policy anybody could devise. But it doesn't stop there. We've then got to pay for new destroyers to look after the submarines. Well, for me and my colleagues, we prefer to spend money on health, welfare and care for the elderly, and not on death and destruction wherever it may be. That's a policy that you should support. The European Union. Well, it's got some supporters, you know. Do you know who the architects were? Adolf Hitler, Winston Churchill. Two well-known figures. One hated probably more by the Welsh miners and steel workers than the other. Just imagine, they wanted a United States of Europe. And what's the policy been? They've systematically closed throughout Europe the steel industry, the coal industry, the motor car industry, apart from Germany. Industry after industry has been destroyed. We manufacture nothing in this country. Although, of course, to listen to Cameron and to Miliband, the City of London really matters because it exchanges money. If you change money from pound notes to dollars or yen or some other currency in the world, they take a chunk by way of profit. Well, we'd stop that for a start. There's no basis for a city that operates on the basis of paper money. I think it was Shelley, the poet, who once said, if the mountains was made of gold and the rivers flowed with silver, men and women in this nation would not be better off by one iota, because we need food to eat, we need fuel to heat our homes, and of course we need homes in which to live. I've seen now everybody's suddenly going on a housing spree. They're all putting forward housing proposals. Have you noticed? On the one hand, they're going to try and build 100,000 new houses. 100,000 new houses over the next 5 years. Boris, moped from London, he says, we're going to build on a brownfield site 400,000 new homes at the cost of £1 billion. Well, Boris, I've debated with him as well at Oxford. He lost that one. We're going to build, if we give him the chance, 1 million new or refurbished homes at a cost of £5 billion. It's not pie in the sky. You go around anywhere in Britain, there are houses empty. Near my doctor's surgery, there's a row of 30 houses and there's only one lived in. Eventually they're going to knock it down. Why? Why not refurbish them all and let people in who want a home? We'd stop the obscenity of the rents that are being charged. And we'd do that by making sure that all houses that weren't owned by people were in fact rented at a rent set by an independent rent officer within the means of all of us. In other words, a sensible rent policy. That would put an end to the speculators. Every person has a right to demand fairness in society, and that means fairness for a sensible, affordable home. Of course, there are more than that. Education. I've touched on it, and so has Andrew. Why do we have an education system as stupid as the one we've got? I'll tell you what we do. The public schools, they're actually private, like Eton and Harrow and Westminster, you know? They all talk bushy around there. All the cabinet went there. Well, we'd ban all private schooling. and which said they've all got to go to a state system which produces an education standard the highest in the world. And I'll tell you something else we'd do. We'd ban all faith schools. If Muslims, Hindus, Buddhists, Protestants, Catholics can all go to university together, why the hell do we separate them at birth for that age until about 7 or 8? I'll tell you what happens, shall I? With children going to faith schools, they become inculcated with a faith and an intolerance towards others simply because they're being taught that way. I'll let them in on a secret. I shouldn't do this and that. I never talk about my personal life. I'll make a change for you. It's a long time ago. I was 16. And I was dating this young woman. Lovely girl. And she stopped seeing me. I couldn't understand it. Well, here I was, you know. I had a lot more hair then. So I waited one night while she came off the bus from work. And I said, you know, what is it? I'm not mentioning her name for obvious reasons. Because they expressed in the mirror, but straight after it. She says, I'm sorry. I says, I know, but you could have just told me you didn't want to see me, you know. You didn't love me. She said, I do. I said, well, why aren't you going out with me? She said, Father says I can't. I said, well, look, can I come and talk to your dad? I'll tell him why I want to go out with you. No, no, she says, it's not my dad, it's the priest. I said, what do you mean? She said, well, you know, I had to tell him I was going out with you. I said, have you told him everything? She said, well, yes. But he says, I can go out with you and I can marry you, provided you do 2 things. I said, what's that? She says, resign from the Young Communist League, I was a communist then, and convert to Catholicism. It ended our relationship. I don't want to see a system where relationships are ended on the basis of someone's ideology or religion. People, whatever colour, creed or background, we're all human beings. And we should say to our youngsters, look what segregation does. And we don't want to see one system replaced by another, only to see the replacement put into place the policies of the past. Don't worry, it's been done. In Ireland, when they got finally independence in the south, the problem was, as James Connolly said, we'll never have a nation that we can call our own unless we gain independence with socialism. He says, if we don't do that, we shall simply replace the landowners, the factory owners from England with those in Ireland. And how true it was. And the same thing's happening tragically in South Africa, where we've seen trade union leaders with whom I was friends sitting on the board of Lonro and shooting 46 miners dead at the Maracana mine 18 months ago. I don't want that. I want to see the means of production, distribution and exchange taken into the hands of people as a whole, so that you control it, you determine what we want, and you are the ones who take the society forward. Of course, that needs a sensible education policy. Energy policy. Andrew touched on this as well. I'll touch on it a bit more. They've got, in the United Nations, a policy that we want an environmentally acceptable climate. I don't want anybody in this audience to misunderstand. There is a fundamental difference between climate change and global warming. Climate change has been taking place since the beginning of time. We've had ice ages, we've had this planet so hot, life couldn't exist. It's no secret that that's happened. I'll tell you this, if the climate begins to change, it can change literally in weeks if the Gulf Stream simply moves a fraction. But what we want to say is that global warming is created mainly by the destruction of the rainforests. They took in carbon dioxide, as every child at school will tell you, and give out clean, fresh air and oxygen. So they chop it down. They destroyed a rainforest in the Amazon bigger than the whole of France. Well, you can't do that without it having an effect upon the environment. They did the same thing in Ireland, and it was Cromwell. He chopped down the whole of Irish oak in Antrim and Donegal and created problems that they still haven't come to terms with. So the issue is, what's taking place in the world? Andrew explained that we want to see an energy policy based on clean coal technology. I'm telling you now, we can produce coal cleanly with no emissions of acid rain or CO2. It's strange, isn't it? We were told that the reason to close the pits in Wales, England and Scotland would help reduce the amount of emissions in our atmosphere. Well, somebody better explain to me what's gone wrong, because we had higher emissions in London, Birmingham, Cardiff and Manchester a few weeks ago than we've ever seen since the Second World War. I'll tell you the problem, shall I? And again, your excellent candidate explained it to you. 80% of the pollution going up into our atmosphere is coming from oil and gas. We're importing half our gas supplies, including LP gas. We're importing oil. And would you believe it? We're importing 44 million tonnes of coal, having closed down the coalfields of Britain. They can't give £100 million to keep the pits. There's only 3 left in Yorkshire open, but they can give the nuclear power industry 1.5 billion in a tax cut. Now that's the way that they operate in the interests of capitalism, because that's the rotten core of the system under which we live. I'll tell you how it could affect you. If we put onto the rail system and onto our waterways all the freight that we transport on our motorways and our byways, 1 train load of freight is equal to 700 juggernauts. Now imagine, if we had a train load of freight every 2 hours, you'd have 700 juggernauts every 2 hours less. They'd be out of business in that sense. But they wouldn't be pumping out their filth into the atmosphere. Mind you, the some bright spark got a new idea. I was over in Ireland recently doing a meeting. And when I read this, I thought it's got to be a joke of the year. They are going to consider in the European Union the policy of farmers in Ireland cutting back the number of cows that they have. They produce too much wind. I could tell you what they mean by that, and you could as well. Just imagine talking in terms like that as a means of controlling what they say is climate change. If you want to get rid of the problems created by what we do, make sure we don't accept fracking, which is destroying not only the continent in America, but they're trying to do the same here in Britain. It not only causes geological disturbance and earthquake, it also pollutes our water supply. And of course, there are droughts all over the world, so how do you change it? You change it by what's called desalinization. I don't know how many people have heard of it, but I'll explain it for the media. There's a rising sea level. You can reduce that by simply creating gas desalination plants and turning the salt water into clean water. By doing that, you'd make the deserts bloom. You would give to the people of Africa a climate where they could grow their crops, feed their animals, water them. They wouldn't want to come away from their own nations in those circumstances, not where they've got a beautiful climate, but a shortage of water, but with water in abundance, provided we channel it in a proper direction. But we're faced, of course, with anti-trade union laws. Well, I've got something to say about that. They accuse me of leading a strike in 1984-5 without a ballot. They started to close our pits without a ballot. Why couldn't they have a ballot to say we're going to close the steelworks and the coal mines? Are you in favour? It would have been 99.9% no, wouldn't it? But they don't do it that way. In a book published by Walker, the then Energy Secretary, he sets out to prove a point. He says 9 areas of the Union were allowed a ballot. In fact, anybody that wanted a ballot could have had one. He says the majority of those 9 areas were against the strike. He just forgot one thing. There were 10 areas voted. And when you had the 10 areas together, there was a 56% majority in favour of a strike. But more important, the High Court in London, I had to go and fight the case, and the judges said it's unlawful for a strike to take place without a ballot. So we got this barrister. I was told he's a top man. Brilliant. And I recall vividly meeting him, and he said, "Don't worry. They can't do what they're trying to do, Mr. Scargill." He said, "We shall go into that court and tell them very clearly your rule book permits you to do what you're doing as a result of a decision of your NEC." And so this young woman solicitor said, "Willie," that was his first name, "don't you think we need to quote Fossenarbottle?" I thought he was talking about sauce. "Oh, no, Jane," he said, "we needn't go that far." Well, Fossenarbottle is a famous case, which means if you've got an objection about something an organisation does, it could be a union, you've got to go, first of all, to your local level and put the case. And if you're not satisfied, you've then got to go to the next level. And if you're not satisfied, you go to the next level. And finally, and it could be in a company, you go to a shareholders meeting next year and put your case. And you can't get round that. That's what Willie said. So we went into court, and things weren't going very well. So Willie decided he was going to throw Fossenarbottle at him. And he went before these 3 judges, and he told them about this case. And they told him to get stuffed and out of the room. And they declared our strike unlawful. But you're never told by the media that in Scotland, the High Court declared the strike legal under the rules of the union. In other words, anti-trade union laws can't be implemented unless the government who are doing it are in breach of the United Nations Convention and the International Labour Organization Convention on Trade Union Rights. This government and the previous governments are signatories to that agreement with the UN. While ever they breach that agreement, they've got no right to interfere with trade unions. And I say quite clearly, and my party says, if you're faced with anti-trade union laws, don't be scared. We took it on the chin and fought them all for over a year. You say to yourselves, no, we have a policy of non-compliance. If they refuse to comply with United Nations judgments, then we're entitled to say we're not prepared to comply with their unfair system that they put into effect. This election is going to be important. It's going to be an election where there are a lot of parties seeking votes that normally would go to the three main parties. The problem with those parties is that they've all got the same type of policies. The difference between them and us is threefold. The Scottish National Party, the SNP, they want independence, but in the meantime, they'll stay with the United Kingdom. But wherever they are, they want to stay in the European Union. Now, if somebody can explain to me why nobody said to Nicola Sturgeon, if you support the policy of remaining in Europe, you're bound by European Convention, who will stop you having a health service free of charge, who will stop you from subsidising the industries that you have in Scotland. And the same goes for Plaid Cymru in Wales, or any party that supports the concept of a United States of Europe and its directives. The people in charge in Brussels are not elected, and yet they are dictating policy for the people of this country and for the peoples throughout Europe. We're not on our own. Look what's happening in Greece and Italy and Spain. Yes, and in France, and even in Germany. But what the United Nations have done to ameliorate things with climate change, they've just given, and I'll tell you, permission to Japan to spend $1 billion on opening coal mines and using coal-fired power stations. They've given a similar amount to fund the development of coal-fired power stations in Indonesia, in Pakistan, and India, and South Korea. Now, if they're paying money to develop coal mining and the use of coal to develop electricity in all those countries, why the hell have they closed the pits and the steel plants in South Wales and the rest of Britain? It's the economics and the policy of the madhouse. I'm proud to be a member of this party. I spoke with someone from the Greens years ago at the Economic Forum in Davos. I think I'm the only trade union leader that ever addressed that forum. After hearing me, they didn't want me back again, I'll tell you. The Financial Times said Mr. Scargill and Frau Kelly, it was Petra Kelly, the Green leader, gave them one hell of a time. They were demanding a different policy called socialism, and it wasn't accepted to the billionaires who were there and the prime ministers and the presidents. There were over 1,000 there. And we put forward a policy similar to the one that you've heard from your candidate tonight, Andrew Jordan, similar to the one that I've tried to express to the best of my ability, and similar to the one on radio today by Elizabeth Screen. I've been a socialist all my life. From the age of 15, I've committed myself to fight for a better world, for a peaceful world, and a world in which all human beings are treated fairly and reasonably, so that we can create a society where we, and not them, can determine our future. That's what the socialists of yesteryear wanted. That's why they created the trade union movement. That's what the suffragettes fought for. That's why we're still here, fighting for the same principles, in a party that was first formed in 1903. I ask you, support your candidate, an outstanding lad, in the general election this year, and you'll vote not only for the best candidate, but you'll vote for a policy and a faith, and you'll never forget it. It's a pleasure to be with you.